So just so you guys know, we're going through this book, Benjamin Weicker. You're familiar with Weicker? He's with Discovery Institute. It's called 10 Books That Screwed Up the World and 5 Others That Didn't Help. It's a good book. We had him at the conference in 2009. He's a good guy, very reclusive. He lives off the grid basically as he does his writing. But he picks 15 books from history, so Machiavelli, we did Hobbes, Rousseau, Descartes. We're on Freud this week. He does it chronologically. So it's a history of ideas and also apologetics to argue against those ideas. Actually, that's what we do in class. The book doesn't do that so much. So this week we are on Freud. The Freud dude. Special place in my heart. I think I have told you before, I minored in psychology. My original career path plan was, as I was in high school, my dad was pretty close with a guy named Larry Crabb. You guys remember him? Larry Crabb and Dan Allender were doing a lot together back then. My dad was the sort of the point person in Michigan to put together conferences up there. So I got to meet Larry Crabb and Dan Allender and talk to them. It's just kind of cool. My dad had gotten a second degree, went to get a master's in counseling, so he could counsel for free at our church, even though he was a stockbroker. So I just thought God was calling me into psychology and counseling. I wanted to do that too. I loved it, talking about ideas. So Larry Crabb actually is the one who said, don't major in, people make the mistake of majoring in psychology. At the graduate level, we're not impressed with psych majors. We're actually annoyed by them because they come in thinking they know more than they do. Like, major in something else, like literature or film or something that is about story, and then we'll take care of teaching it. But you might want a minor in psych. So that's what I did. I majored in film and I minored in psych because I was planning on going into counseling. But along the way, I realized I don't actually like psychology. What I thought was psychology is actually called philosophy. It's thinking deeply about reality, whereas psychology stacks the conversation against a real solution because it says these options are not available to you. God, the spirit, teleology, things like that. They don't even know what those words mean largely. So I have a love-hate with Freud and psychology in general. Had a whole class on Freud where we actually studied his dreams, his writings on dreams. And the interesting thing about Freud, to know up front, is when people say Freud believed this or that, you almost immediately have to ask, what Freud are we talking about? Because he evolved from his early writings in the 1800s until his death so drastically that to say Freud believed X is, well, what point in his career are you looking? Because he said he refined a lot of things, but he also straight up contradicted some things or changed his thinking and things. So to be fair to Freud, look at him as a work in progress all the way up till the end. I don't think he ever landed on, yeah, this is exactly the way I think things are. I don't think that Benjamin makes the mistake of oversimplifying Freud in here, but just to be aware of the fact, like his id, ego, and superego, which is, I love this joke here. You ever seen that? You get it?
Oh, gosh. I'm gonna need to see some id.
We'll explain the id, ego, and superego in a minute, but those concepts were later in his career where he really locked them down and said, here's what these three things are, and here's how they interplay with each other in your psyche. But they had in their infancy early on in the 1800s, so that's an example of something that he grew into. So, does anybody not get that joke? Because I thought it was funny. Nerd out a little bit there. Okay, so biographical. He was born in 1856 and died in 1939. Just like Darwin, and unlike some of the others, he had a long career. I mean, you think about somebody born at a time that medicine was progressing upward, and we had a lot of things that he could have died of in that time, and he didn't. That's pretty impressive right away that he lived such a long life. He's Jewish. Well, he still is Jewish. He was Jewish. Never a believing Jew. His father was an unbelieving Jew. He had a little bit of animosity toward religious Jews, and of course Christians and other religions. His whole life, he was a devout atheist. Father of modern psychology. His branch of psychology was psychoanalytic therapy. as opposed to like Skinner's behaviorism, and so there's different schools of thought within psychology. His is psychoanalytic, and considered the father of all psychology, because he's the one who started to say this is a branch of study that you can actually do scientifically, and so then people would start doing it and breaking off into their denominations. He was real big on the interpretation of dreams. That was his gateway. He thought that and storytelling and just free form what's that, association type of things. That was a little peek into somebody's subconscious, that you could get down to the real problems in his. And then of course he believed, or didn't believe it, he came up with the idea of the id, the ego, and the superego. So one thing I'll say is, again, that I have a love-hate relationship with psychology in general. The love side of it is he introduced thoughts into our thinking just as humans that weren't there before, that we actually appreciate. The idea of even an unconscious or a subconscious doing something subconsciously, or that was not on anyone's radar. So that's a good thing that he introduced. It's like Darwin, he introduced some good concepts. It wasn't all wrong. And so when we are witnessing to somebody, especially if they're informed about a topic like psychology or biology in Darwin's case, to show that we're nuanced and we're not wholesale rejecting everything about a person, shows them that, okay, well, first of all, we care enough to learn ahead of time, but also I'm so nuanced that I'm trying to earn the respect from you to give me an audience to hear out the gospel, so that when I present my case for Christianity, know that I've had that same nuance and that same honesty that I'm bringing into my gospel presentation or my other apologetics. So you see how if we just, Darwin, you know, he the caricatures, even back then, non-Christian opponents of Darwin were, you know, caricaturing him and saying things like, you know, so is it your mom's side or your dad's side of the family that is related to the apes? You know, they would say stuff like that. Well, it's just, it doesn't get to really the core of what he was trying to say. And if Christians, and we do, say stuff like that, then we're just lost an audience, and it doesn't help the gospel. So he offered a lot of good things. Also, the thing I think that I most appreciate about him, you think about, you know, tell me about your mother, the famous joke within psychoanalytic theory, because he was obsessed with that. What he introduced to common vernacular is how we treat one another matters. You can really screw up your kid. If you don't parent well, if you don't love well, he might be on Freud's couch in 10, 20 years from now. You know, that sort of idea just didn't exist before. You know, seen and not heard, do what dad says without any, I mean, that died out because of things like Freud coming into say our consciousness. It sounds very new agey, but we became aware of the fact that in a deeper level, that you can really mess up somebody depending on how you treat them, especially at a young age. That's a good thing. Now, he was all messed up about the phallic stage, the anal stage, the first one was oral anal phallic, and I can't remember the fourth one. Okay, he was weird. He was, you read about his biography and you're like, man, this guy was probably pretty wicked, like dark. Like, I saw some things, I did some more reading, and I was like, I think he may have had some gay love affairs. They talked about, and this was in Britannica, and they were saying things that, like, I never heard that before, so I got to look at it more. But he had a lot of problems. He was messed up in a lot of ways, but I'm not going to wholesale dismiss him. So the id, what he meant by the id was your primitive primal urges to punch somebody if they make you mad. Because look at how kids act on playgrounds, you know, or to poop your pants if you have to go. He talked a lot about infancy, going into toddler, going into being a toilet train, where he called it what that stage was called now, after the phallic stage. So that's what the id. So inside of us, we've got these impulses that how we really want to act, but the ego stops us from doing so. What do you call the ego? The reality principle. And that the reality principle, the ego, was there to fight the id, and the superego is deeper than this, but essentially was the referee. Superego was the part of our psyche, of our trifecta psyche, that said, okay, now you know, and he's the one, or it's the one that tries to balance us so that we're not crazy punching everybody that we're upset with, or so repressed that we never speak our mind or accomplish what we really want in life. So that's the id, the ego, and the superego. I think these labels are wrong. I think that we don't have a trichotomy going on inside of us. But the idea of urges, this sinful nature, of course, he rejects the idea of sinful nature. So that's, roughly speaking, the id is the sinful nature, and the ego is maybe the new man or the original nature that God made us in His image. That even unbelievers know that the things I have in my sinful nature are not right. They're not really good for me. And so that struggle is in everybody, whether they're saved or not. Now, when you're saved, you really know it's wrong. So, I mean, he's onto something there, but he refused to even entertain the idea of God. We do not want to give the impression, however, that Freud was all bad. I just want to say that he said this too. I was glad to see this. He did immensely rich work in psychoanalytic, and helped unearth some of the deep unconscious motivations of human nature. So now we're going to talk about Freud's view of God. An illusion, remember the book that we're dealing with. By the way, thin book again. Remember Communist Manifesto? Thin little book, 100 million dead later. You know, it's like, it doesn't take much sometimes to really screw up the world. He wrote a lot more than this. This is just one of his books. But this is the one where he attacks the idea of God specifically. So that's why we're doing it. That's why he brought it up. So it's called The Future of an Illusion. And the illusion he's dealing with is religion. It's not the same thing as an error, nor is it necessarily an error. What is characteristic of illusions is that they are derived from human wishes. In this respect, they come near to psychiatric delusions. Goes on to say, it would be very nice if there were a God who created the world, and he was a benevolent providence. But it is a very striking fact that all of this is as exactly as we are bound to wish it to be. He was very into wish fulfillment. He thought that's what dreams were. You've seen that motivational poster. Remember the real popular motivation posters that I got annoyed with them pretty quickly, but you know, some nature scene and some cool little quote and frilly. And in the Saturday Night Live skits, the Deep Thoughts with Jack Handy, that's what he was making fun of, was this over sappy. But I saw one with a Sigmund Freud quote, "Dreams are wishes our heart makes when we're asleep." And it was all frilly, and it had some, you know, waterfall or something like that. And I'm like, that motivational poster writer has no idea of the depth of what he's actually meaning by that. It's not some feel-good, you know, you can do it, at a boy, at a girl kind of thing. So he literally thought that the repression of what our ego, or id, was trying to do, we repress it. The ego is winning out on the id, and that's why we're civilized. And so it's all repressed. And so when you're asleep, your id is kind of free to do what it wants. And so it has wishes, it has desires, impulses, and it's acting them out in your sleep. So that's what he thought dreams were. Wishes your heart makes when you sleep.
Forbidden Planet.
Yeah, kind of.
Well, that's what it was.
Yeah.
It was their id that created the monster.
Yeah, that's right. Because he okay. Never mind. For some reason, I went to C.S. Lewis's trilogy.
Oh, no.
You're right. That's exactly that movie was obviously going off of Freud.
Freud, yes.
And you guys know the movie, the 1950s movie?
Yeah.
Now here's the question, who was the star of that?
Leslie Nielsen.
I remember watching that going, man, who is that guy? And I'm like, that's Leslie Nielsen. Don't call me Shirley. He was a serious actor at one point. Man, he never went back after Airplane. Nobody could look at him and not laugh, no matter what he's saying. It's like, just too funny. So yeah, that movie, I actually had to study that for film school. I had a science fiction class, and that's classic because of it was dealing with a very academic, heavy topic. Sigmund Freud, wish fulfillment. Okay, of course, what he's saying is we want there to be a God. That's our wish, the big daddy in the sky, all this kind of stuff. But too bad it's just a wish. So here's. First of all, God is a childhood neurosis we never outgrow. That's how he puts it. It's this irrational desire for there to be this being, and we never outgrow it if we stay religious. Of course, he would say, the enlightened ones, the atheists, they outgrow it. But here's the problem with that. Even calling it a wish or saying, because what he would point out is, how nice, isn't it, that there's a being out there that satisfies all of your deepest, to be protected, to have meaning and purpose, and someone to talk to whenever. Yeah, isn't that nice? It's a wish. And so you have this projection in your psyche called God because it fills that wish. Okay, you already noticed there. That is a textbook example of the genetic fallacy. A belief, a position, a proposition cannot be called false because of the origin of that belief. So that's where genetic comes in, the genesis of it. So how a person came to believe this or that is completely irrelevant as to whether or not that belief is true. So your mom and dad tell you that Santa Claus brings presents, and you have evidence to see, okay, I trust them on all these other things, and lo and behold, every Christmas morning there are presents under the tree. That is not why Santa Claus is false, because mom and dad told them that. I'm trying to think of an example on the fly that would be obviously true. People can believe true things for very bad reasons, how they came about to believe it. But whether or not, I think I've heard an example by philosophers will say, there is a slice of blue cheese on the dark side of the moon right now. And I believe that because I think an alien came to me in a vision and told me so. Okay, everyone's going to say, yeah, you're full of it, there's no way. But that statement is still either objectively true or objectively false. How I came to believe it. Now, what if I say an alien came to me and told me that tomorrow the winning number for the lottery is going to be, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, and it happens that is the number. Now, I was totally wrong for the origin of my belief that an alien came and told me that, but it doesn't mean that the statement's false until you correspond it to reality, in which case, in that case, it's wait till the lottery number is announced, and that will tell you whether it's true or false. So you see what a genetic fallacy is. You can't just simply dismiss it, no matter how absurd it is. We use absurd examples to show you that even crazy people, that we would write off, you don't write off their beliefs, their statements, just because it was them that said it. When we did Hitler, I said, Hitler probably in some time in his life said something true about Jewish people. Just because he's the worst anti-Semite ever to live, doesn't mean he couldn't say something true about Jewish people. So that's just, again, it shows a clear thinking, a level-headed approach that we as Christians want to come at these questions with, so that when people that we're interacting with don't make that same mistake. Now, I use these examples. When I proposed to Jenny to marry me, I wished deeply that she was going to say yes. So the fact that she said yes, what connection? I wished it because I wished it, but she did say yes. I wish there's a God. If there's a God, it's irrelevant whether I wished it or not ahead of time, because in that case, I did wish it. Now, what about your children want to be loved by their parents. By Freud's own schema, they shouldn't believe that their parents actually love them, because they want them to love them. So in other words, anything you wish that you have a propensity to or desire for, that you wish to be true, you should just say is not true, because he calls it an illusion. What you think is love that your parents are showing is just an illusion of love, because the only standard is because you want them to love you. So it can't be true. You start to see like nothing, then what can you know is true? So I like engineers and scientists, they wish or hope or they want their work to be real. An engineer wants their machine to work. A scientist wants his theory to be proven correct. So the fact that you wish it, should you also think that your science and your engineering is also an illusion?
Or your psychoanalysis?
Exactly. Try to get closer. Try to get closer to them. Using the put their claim on itself, or apply the claim to itself. Exactly. Do you wish that psychoanalytic theory is right? Okay, then it's false. It's an illusion. Actually, he wouldn't say illusions were false, but it's an illusion, just like religion then. Atheists want there to be no God. They wish there to be no God because they don't like this idea of accountability. And Freud said all these things, and that's pretty common with atheists. So they don't want there to be a God, so by his own definition, atheism is an illusion. So the one thing that stuck out to me, I think it was in Weiker's book, but I read all these other sources, so if it's not in here, but somewhere they pointed out that he never actually had a robust atheism. Like, he didn't think through it and conclude. He was absorbed in atheism from his dad and was an atheist for his whole life. He didn't, not like Nietzsche, where he thought through, I'm an atheist because, and here are the implications of atheism, and he went mad, maybe partly because of that. Freud just was an atheist. And you can kind of see that in there. You're like, well, but Freud, you're just jumping to atheism is true, and then you're giving us all these explanations why everything that's not atheism is an illusion.
What was Freud's childhood like?
His dad was not horrible, but overbearing. He was the youngest. I think he was raised along, this is where I learned the first thing. He had a inappropriately close relationship with a cousin, male cousin. They didn't say anything in this article about sexually inappropriate, but they said that it was so close that it was, they both loved and hated each other through life.
But his mother and dad stayed together, and he was raised.
Yeah, he died. His dad died, I think, when he was in his teens.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but it wasn't. I didn't see anything that it was a tragedy like we saw with the other famous
Right,
atheists.
right.
Yeah, but there was a. It was different. Yeah, when his dad died, his mom and aunt, I think, and older sisters were the mother figures until he was out of the house. So, like this is, found this quote from Geisler. Saying that a real need is a sign of psychological weakness is like saying hunger and thirst are neuroses. Norm is just so good at just saying it in one sentence. You're like, yeah, that gets it right there. I'm hungry. Ah, yeah, you wish you were hungry. You wish you had food. So your hunger is an illusion. How primitive of you to think that you actually are hungry. It's just crazy. Okay, teleology. We're back to that. Everybody know that word by now? Keep coming back to it because I like it. It's a cool word. Of course, Aquinas didn't say the word. Teleology is more of an analytic category, but in classical philosophy, you do your metaphysics, and right from that, you've got epistemology and teleology. Because in classical, well, let's just back up. Okay, people ought to be a certain way. Again, just like the other authors that we've been reading, he is constantly talking about the way things ought to be. People ought to see this as an illusion. People ought to be freed up from their repression of their impulses, things like that. He's still talking in terms of there is something that you ought to be called human. That's a telos. That is what a telos is. Like, that's what we mean when we say it's a good human and that's a bad human. This one's, in between, whatever. We're measuring against something called human nature. Even family relationships. I mean, if he's going to talk about, the Oedipus complex and all that, he's introducing oughts into it. Otherwise, there's nothing for him to do. If everything is equal in value, fine, the Oedipus complex. If one child actually does murder his father so he can sleep with his mother, that's no different than, you guys know that's the Oedipus complex. Like, I'm not just saying that, that's actually Freud's. That's just as legitimate as a child who kills his mother because he wants his dad. Whatever. You start mixing things up. Freud, the fact that you were trying to find that, diagnose it, and cure it means that you acknowledge that there's a way family relationships ought to be. There's a way a person ought to be. Okay, well, if there's an ought, then it just means that there's a human nature. There's a nature of things. Because an ought can't be found in biology. Unless you can be a strict physicalist, in which case, okay, where's the gene for atheism? Where's the coding for theism? And if I have the theism gene, why are you getting all up in my face about being a theist? I'm genetically predisposed to that. If you reduce everything to physical, then all sorts of absurdities get introduced. So it's pretty obvious to most people that there is a nature, human nature. We talk about theologically, Adam had human nature, Jews had human nature, we had there's one human nature. We are instances of those natures. So I am Eric, that's my who-ness. My whatness is human, and yours is human too. That's why Adam's sin is across all of our natures, and also why Christ's sacrificial death is across all our natures. So these things are important to all of these biblical and theological ideas. It's not just the psychology we're talking about. So Freud, if there is such a thing as human nature, the question is, number one, then atheism has a hard time, is very uncomfortable. There are some forms of atheism that believe in spirits. But how do you as an atheist account for an immaterial thing? Human nature is not, there's no atomic weight of human nature. So you ask them, account for this. What is these teloi, the teleology that you're laying out, that your whole practice is centered around, getting people cured to be a certain kind of person because they ought to be this and ought to not be that, is predicated on human nature. What is a nature? So he's going to quickly have to account for it in purely physical terms, which is impossible. And you're getting him into, yes, now, there is something called human nature, so materialism is false. That's right off the bat. If anything that's not material exists, then materialism by definition is false. So you've gotten that part out of the way. So are you an atheist that believes in non-material things? Some forms of Buddhism, for example, actually do call it, they're atheists. They don't believe in a theistic being, but they believe in spirits, the spiritual realm. So your soul will survive death, is what they're saying. So are you that kind of atheist, Freud? You start walking them through, okay, now why is that not satisfying? The next thing is, what accounts for these things called natures? There's this immaterial thing. Can immaterial things have material causes? The answer is no, but think about that for a while and get them to think about that. If a non-material thing, like a human nature, cannot have, by definition, a material cause, then it has to be an immaterial cause. Now you're talking about something that sounds like God. Like, what can create, what can hold in existence natures? Only something that you start describing this thing, and like Aquinas always says, and this is what all men mean by God. So you're right at the second way, or the teleological argument, or whatever you're comfortable with using. I do recommend getting comfortable with the 5 ways, because they're just so much more profound. But the analytic teleological argument's good. It's valid, it's sound. You're right there. You're talking to somebody about God, something existing that just sounds an awful lot like what everybody means when they say God. So just on his own, if he's right, then there is a God. But the very thing he's trying to say is there is no God. So using his teaching in order to
What would he
debunk his
consider a
teaching.
dream? Is that just some kind of chemical reaction?
Yeah, he would just say it's your brain.
Oh.
He was very inconsistent because, well, what is an id, an ego, and a superego? Like, where in your body physically are those? So sometimes you read Freud and he doesn't sound like a physicalist, but he was committed to materialism, and it gets frustrating that, especially people who walk away from the faith that we've talked about, that breaks my heart, because like here, Freud, you're talking about these things that just sound awful lot like immaterial things, and your starting point denies that. So don't you see there's a tension in your own beliefs? And yet things like Freud, belief systems like Freudian or Darwin, for example, we've talked about, these things that are internally inconsistent are enough for some people to just walk away from the church, walk away from their faith, and that breaks my heart. And it's partly my passion to encourage the church, myself included, to do a better job than we've been doing, because it should be seen as absurd quickly by people who are reading and thinking about these things, just to ask these questions. Freud, what is an id? Like, where in my body is it? Is there an id gland? So dreams, he would have to say, it's just firings of your computer up here. But in like the modern neuro, I forget the name of the field, but brain research, they're trying to reduce everything to just purely physical. There's no such thing as a mind. There's only a brain. And so they'll watch with probes, and they'll tell a person to think about blue, think about a dog, or then go and sleep, and they try to reduce everything down to just firings in the brain. I think Freud would probably have to get back into something like that.
Don't the naturalists now like kind of shove these things into the 3 different brains? The reptilian brain that everybody has, that we have, that was from our original,
Like an ancestor, like
yeah,
an
that was from our
evolutionary-
original ancestor, and they've got a diagram of where it is. It's the instinct part where, you know, where we feel pain, where we move, you know, our heart and stuff. That's all part of the reptilian brain. Then you have the mammalian brain, and
Randall, have you heard of that?
No.
Send me a link. I'd be curious. I've not heard that before.
it's a naturalistic thing.
You remember that video?
An evolution thing.
Yeah, but yeah, it would be interesting. Okay. The John Cleese video. Have you seen that?
Which one?
John Cleese, the guy, the tall, dark-haired guy from Monty Python. He has a video series, and you type in John Cleese, the brain neurology or something. It's him standing there in a lab coat and lecturing in a condescending kind of way, in the typical British. And he's talking about the parts of the brain. You know, people used to think that you had things like free will, but let me tell you. So he's pointing to parts of the brain. Now, this is the part of the brain that does this. This is the part of the brain that where belief in God originates. This is the part of the brain which makes people do irrational things like see Nicolas Cage movies. And so he's being funny. But then he gets to the part, he says, and this is the part of the brain that causes you to have a reductionist view of reality. And then he moves and then he starts unraveling from there. And it turns out he's making fun of people who actually think that we're just only the biology. And so I mean, they get it right sometimes in their criticism. And when they do, they're hilarious. Of course, the soccer game, the famous Philosopher's World Cup. So it's a little different to talk about natures and teleology and stuff than normal Bible study. But you guys get what we're saying with that? The whole idea of like there's something called human nature. That's a single thing. And so if that thing it does exist, it has to span between all of us, which means it's not physical. And then we're right into, okay, then materialism's false, and then what is the cause of non-physical things? Other non-physical things, spirits. Talking about a cause of all natures. Now you can extrapolate human nature, tree nature, all the natures that are in the universe. Whatever caused all of these things to happen is awesome. I mean, the nature of a nebula we're talking about as well. So you're right away, you're at the doorstep of the church, or the synagogue, I guess, in this case. Probably not the mosque. Okay. So Darwin attempted to explain the diversity and origin of life without God. So his introduction to the Western thought was, all right, we can do this thing called biology without any reference to God. All right. Marx comes along, roughly around the same time, and he tries to say, here's how we organize ourselves societally, economically, without God. So we can do that too. We don't need God to behave and to have a society that works properly. Freud, he came along and he said, here's how you understand something that used to be only in terms of, you know, the Beatitudes, the commandments of Jesus, the thou shalt and thou shalt nots, human interactions. And he's like, no, you don't need any of that. Let me tell you how to understand human beings and complexities inside and in between human beings with no reference to God or even the spiritual. That's what these three people tried to do. We've talked about these two already, and I think this is why, as apologists, we have to be knowledgeable about each of these three. But always remember this. Think of the islands, like the Hawaiian Islands. You got Darwinian evolution, you have life issues like abortion and euthanasia and stem cell research, even things like post-humanism, transhumanism, trying to improve upon God's design, and then LGBTQ issues. I just put three hot ones up there. We're fighting these three things. You have American Family Association and Family Talk and all that. They're on that. They're doing these things. But they're attacking this, they're attacking that. and these are good battles to be fought. But if you're not doing philosophy, you're not doing what really matters, which is down here, they all have the same source.
That's right.
So we're on the surface of the water looking at islands popping up as though they're different things. What do all three of those, Marx and Darwin and Freud, have in common? The atheism. So proving theism, proving that God exists, you're taking care of all of the source material for these islands that pop up. This is where Christians have been the weakest in the last, I think, couple centuries, really. Lay people, definitely. But even in the academy, I think they have been. That's what we're trying to do. This is what classical philosophy, classical theism, classical apologetics, why it's so important. We're dealing with that, and not up here only. I love that Jay Sekulow does what he does, and I draw attention to it. I tell people to support him, but support SES first, and then maybe Joshua Christie, and then maybe in that order, right? We're throwing a couple others in there, but. So I love what he does. I love what American Family does, of course. Family Research Council. Okay, you guys are like the fighters in the front line and all that, but especially FRC, like guys, you think that this is the battle, but it's not. This is a skirmish in the battle, or even in the war. This is where it all starts, and this is where we keep losing. So another island's going to pop up. If we're able to blow up the island of LGBTQ, something else will pop up, right? Mm-hmm. Until we deal with the underlying philosophy. Now, this does not mean we're going to usher in the millennium and everything's going to be, kumbaya or anything like that. Satan's never going to stop. The world's never going to stop. But we unfortunately have this commandment of God, which is fight until you're bleeding on your knuckles, you have nothing left in you, until I come back or I take you home. So we don't have the option of saying, well, it's just going to get worse. Satan's obviously smarter than us. And I'm saved. Well, I'll tell people about Jesus, obviously, but I'm not going to get involved in all that stuff. That's just too much work. That's not an option for us as Christians.
So we're just basically fighting to delay the next coming.
Well, what they say, the frozen chosen, or lock yourself in your church, and just some people, you're welcome to come in, but frankly, if you're not a Christian, leave it out there. We don't want it here.
Yeah, that's fun. That's wrong belief about God and His attributes. If you apply that to the psychology, then you get Larry Crabb, which is because basically everything that people think is wrong.
What I liked about Larry Crabb is what he said. I hear he lives in Charlotte now, so I'm trying to find him because I want to get him here. I want to at least get him to the seminary and do a podcast with him, because what he said was, one thing that I know, if I have a couple in for marriage counseling, let's say, I absolutely know. What do I know about these two people? They're both sinners. That's my starting point. And they're also both made in the image of God. And so they ought to be treated a certain way. They're right to say, you shouldn't treat me that way. Yes, that's right. But with the acknowledgement that you also don't treat your spouse the way they ought to be treated. So he starts with some really good. That's why I think he really is a philosopher who doesn't know. He's trapped in the psychology profession. But man, he was a good theologian through his career and a good philosopher. That's why I wanted to get him on the air and talk to him about the philosophy of these things.
Yeah.
So,
but to him, every psychological neurosis or whatever comes from a bad thing, wrong belief about God.
What Crabb says actually is it's all of our interpersonal problems, of course, are personal problems, and they trace back to, because when we're finding God, I doubt God, or really what he says, I hate God. Mm-hmm. What he means is in our sinful nature, we have this clenched fist. No, you're not going to tell me to not build cities, or no, you're not going to tell me to do this or that. And that's what he's saying is interpersonally. But again, he starts with. He's not starting. In fact, he was very much against. I say was like he's dead. He's not practicing like he was before. But he was very much against blaming. So he would tell people at counseling conferences, professional counselors, he goes, look, if talking about what Dad did to you growing up, or an uncle, or if it's tragic, obviously, if that's going to help you get to the main point, which is what bad choices are you making now, what wrong beliefs need to be corrected now, you know, what sin, you know, that, then do that, but don't ever do it as, that's the problem, that's why I'm messed up. He hates victim mentality and blaming. Larry Crabb, he wasn't welcome very often at the AACC because the American Association of Christian Counselors, because he did not like ending at, we found out what the problem is. And he also, anyway, he's very conservative theologically. That's what I like about him. He's even a dispensationalist. He never talks about it, but he grew up Plymouth Brethren, which is a dispensation, very strong. So, like, he's the whole package, right? He never talked about that or anything. So, yeah, Larry Crabb, again, he didn't do PhD level philosophy, so he had more room to grow. But I super appreciate what he did. Like he tried so hard to correct the I'm okay, you're okay culture that grew up in the 70s that infiltrated the church, because we just absorb everything. We're just a sponge as a Christian culture. He couldn't stand that. He always said, no, it should be I'm a mess, you're a mess. Yeah, let's start there. It's not I'm okay, you're okay. We're sinners. We are actively rebelling against, we would say, the God who's holding us intimately in existence right this moment. That's why you have neuroses, not because of these other things. And so he believed counseling was about getting back to that. True, one soon comes across the first difficulty. Funny, they say this and then they don't say, therefore I shouldn't believe in any of my starting points. Everyone else has exactly the same wishes as I have, that id. Okay, everyone's got this id, and will treat me with no more consideration than I treat him. And so in reality, only one person could be made unrestrictedly happy by such a removal of the restrictions of civilization, and he would be a tyrant, a dictator. Look, isn't that enough for you to go back and say, where did I get it wrong? Because this obviously is chaos, this is anarchy, this is evil. But like Nietzsche, this is Nietzsche right here. And Nietzsche said the same thing, that you have to have somebody, this is the prince, you have to have somebody that's going to manipulate their way up. Nietzsche gave a prescription for how to do it. I don't understand why that wasn't enough for them to say, yeah, I don't think that's true, and I really am uneasy about that conclusion. Let me go back and see where I may have gotten some of my thinking wrong that led me to here. But no, he says that is the first difficulty. No, that's the end of your theory, dude. Just, okay, go back to the drawing board. Of course, and you should get to God does exist, and let's redo the whole thing. The unlivability of atheism. This is what I just thought about this. Atheists want everyone else to live as though God exists. It's like the hippies. Imagine if the whole country did what Woodstock did. The only reason the hippies could even assemble and do Woodstock is because engineers built the stage and sound system and kept it going, and police kept them protected in general. There are so many things that had to be in place, executed by people who don't agree at all with what they stood for, in order for them to stand there and pretend that that mindset was true. So it's atheism in general, moral relativism, of course, postmodernism. I mean, it's just you can't live in the real world where everyone, or the majority even, people believe that. And that's why I think what we're wrestling with right now in our culture, and definitely our country, is that we're right at that point where about 50% of the people believe this garbage. They live it out to some degree, and it's messing us up big time. I mean, this is the type of thing that allows a judge, a Supreme Court, to say gay marriage is legal because of these starting points, and then all the things without even thinking through. Man, this is going to cause a lot of First Amendment issues. Oh my gosh, free speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. But we're just going to say it and then leave it there. And so we still haven't figured all that out yet about the bakers and the florists and preachers and on and on and on.
I think
he did win, but they were clear that they said we are not ruling. The lower court should not take this ruling as anything. What's the word? It's not a precedent. We are not setting a precedent. We are just saying in this isolated case, this man met the burden, a minimal burden of providing for his customer a
I thought there was
reasonable
another one
solution.
last week though.
There was, I don't know, that'd be good, let me know that, because
I think there was another one last week.
I'm talking about the Colorado baker, that's the one that
Yeah.
they gave that really narrow victory to.
It seems like they're all bakers right now, but
And the florist from the Pacific Northwest, it's in Seattle or, but somewhere up there, where she actually went out of business and almost lost everything. This baker in Colorado, he had a lot more fire in him.
he's smart.
And he's smart too, but he was under the counsel of the ADF, doing things the way he did it so that it would force the case. He was very good about it. He went to gay-owned bakeries. They did that, he did, and then he lodged the same complaint that they lodged against him, and he was denied, and he said, well, you're applying the law unequally with me and with those bakers, that's a violation, so they brought that up, and they had the paperwork to go. I mean, it was a ruling by the authorities that
There's
was wrong.
there's like 3 groups that are like keeping America afloat right now. Is it Tom Fitton and his group, the Judicial Watch?
Oh, yeah.
The group you just said?
The FRC, Family
Yeah.
Research Council.
And the
There's
lawyers.
American Family, ACLJ.
ACLJ
Yeah.
and Trump.
Well,
Congress and the Senator aren't doing it.
No.
I mean, it's
But
everything
remember,
we
still,
find
we
out
don't
is
wanna
because
get
of
caught
this.
in all those things are still islands, so as we argue for the gay bakers, the baker's right to not bake a gay cake, why is that true? How is a gay cake? The cake self-identified as.
Not to participate in a gay wedding.
So, the right, I think, in the courtroom, you can only be legal, I get that, but when we're talking about it with people, just be like, look, he wasn't trying to be mean to them. They were regular customers of his. He offered them, here are some names of other bakers that I recommend. They do good work. I'm sure that they would be more than happy to, but participating in the wedding ceremony, I'll bake some stuff for you. I think he even offered to bake things like pastries or whatever, but not to put a wedding with the 2 women instead of 2 men. It was just basically the artistic expression that violated his First Amendment. So talk to people about the First Amendment. We talk about that all the time. I mean, do you think that we all have a right to freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, and freedom of petition? Do you think those things? Yeah, I think we do. Okay, great. Where do rights come from? Talking about natures again. The argument that our founding fathers made, and that Martin Luther King made, and that Martin Luther King Jr. made, and that they made in the Nazi war crime trials. I agree with all those cases that those 3 parties were making. Do you? Yeah, I agree with all those. Okay, then this baker has a right to say no. And that right is not something that's written down by somebody. It exists prior to it being written down. Those are the kind of conversations I don't hear very often in the popular media and from the pulpit, from Christian commentators, not from Family Research Council. And that's what I regret, is it's not that hard to say it and to understand it. It takes a little more thinking, but not a lot. As Americans, we're used to the First Amendment being talked about, but we're not prepared to go there. And I think that we're missing opportunities right now. Especially with, I'll show you this later, Randall. Did you see that, who was it, Heritage Foundation, that Ryan Anderson hosted, you know him? He spoke at a conference a few years ago. He's taken the mantle from, what's his name over at Princeton, Robbie George, to fight against, from a natural law perspective, against gay marriage and homosexuality, but primarily gay marriage. So he hosted 4 liberal, 3 lesbians, one of those lesbians was a feminist activist, these are radical left-wing, and one is a man, but he was a transgender. He lived as a woman for many years, had the surgery and everything, but he realized it was wrong, and now he's a man, but he's still as liberal as he was. So this panel of 4 people wanted to speak because they said, we're worried about the transgender movement, and they gave all of these reasons. I posted it on our site back then. Did you see it?
Yeah.
I'm gonna repost. It's the best hour and 9 minutes you'll spend on that topic, because these 4 people are saying, Ryan said the same thing, we don't agree about a single thing, politically, culturally, we are so against each other. Except we understand that if there's no such thing as a man and a woman, male and female, then everything crumbles. People's personal rights, liberties, job security. One gal on there, she was the lesbian advisor to a governor and got fired because she dared to say, I'm not a man trapped in a woman's body, I'm a woman who's attracted to women. That got her fired because the transgender on the committee was offended at that. That's hate speech. She was blown away. And one of the other ones, the activist, she was giving stories about children being forcefully taken away from parents because the children wanted to transition or were even thinking about it, and the parents tried to counsel them away from it. No, you are a boy, you are a girl, whatever. The children were removed from the parents in Oregon and California and I think Vermont. She goes, and the neat thing is she just goes through cases. She goes, these are all in the courts now, this is not me making up stuff, this is current events. And it's very moving because what's showing is that even as homosexuals, they're trying to say there's such a thing as nature. There's a nature that I am they're confusing it, but they're saying I'm a gay male. That's what my nature is. Of course, we would come in and say, okay, now you're onto something, this is good, you're thinking about the right things now, but why would you think that gay is something that natures would provide you? Because your immaterial nature is individuated as a male or as a female. That's what makes you you. That's polymorphism. And you can start talking about all that stuff, and I'm sure Ryan did off the mic. But it's so interesting to me because I see a crack in the LGBTQ alliance, that they're starting to say, wait a second, some of these people in our movement, they're crazy. They're crazy, they're mean. They said this, that these people are mean-spirited, vindictive, and they will not rest until they've absolutely pummeled to death, if they need to, anyone that disagrees with them. And these are homosexual activists that are saying this about the transgender activists. So the Christians are all like, yeah, welcome to our party. I mean, man, it's been like this since the 60s. Come on. It's very, very enlightening. But again, Ryan does a good job, Ryan Anderson, of bringing it back to whenever he discusses it, nature's philosophy. He's a Thomist, and so he does a good job of the philosophy. I do want to say one thing, though. Yeah, I'll say it. Now, Ben Weicker is a Catholic. In general, I guess that means he's a Thomistic thinker, but I didn't know enough back then when I met him to ask him about that. Like Jay Richards is a Thomist and a Catholic, but he's also really cool. He has no desire to convert Protestants to Catholicism. So I don't know where Ben Weicker does not seem like a militant Catholic either. But I thought this was interesting. Freud's rooting of religion in incest and patricide, or the killing of your father, was a direct attack not only on religion as a whole, but especially Christianity. And he says Christianity, both on the Eucharist and perhaps on the idea of the Virgin Mary. Do you remember this section? My first thing was, whoa, Christianity and Catholicism, Eucharist is a specifically Catholic doctrine.
You eat the body of Christ.
Right. And you've got Lutherans and Episcopalians and others that still believe in a sacrament, but they do not believe in transubstantiation, consubstantiation at the most. So he's saying, like, all of Christianity believes in the Eucharist and the Virgin Mary, right? And what do you mean by the Virgin Mary? Yeah, we believe that Mary was a virgin when she had her first child, and that's awesome. That's a miracle. That's where our commonality ends with Catholics on their view on Mary. So with his implication, the religious person, that the most holy sacrament of the Christian church was a vile recapitulation of patricidal cannibalism fueled by incest. That's what he says. Freud was, and he's right, Freud did say that, things like that all the time, but all the more reason to remind people like Freud, did you know that there was this thing called the Reformation, where there were some pretty serious disagreements about exactly your point, and then I go to the Catholics and they say, you see why we care so much about you guys changing these aberrant beliefs, see what the world sees, I actually understand why they're confused. Because the way you talk about this, it's crazy. Like this transubstantiation, I don't know if you took the Catholicism class with Norm. It's actually, the lectures are free up online. We put them, when we had the Exodus thing years back, we put it up there for free. We're like, here, you take it. And he's reading their work and their description of what they think transubstantiation means. And it's like, so as a Thomist, you say that knowledge begins with your senses, is the last thing I'll say then, because we've got time. The Thomism starts with, and they say they believe it, your senses and your intellect come together to give you true knowledge about reality, and that knowledge about reality points you to, analogically, God's attributes, and that's how we know God exists. That's the package of how humans all know God. Okay, so your senses are really important to say that they work in Thomism, in Catholic metaphysics. But that very thing, when you go up there to take communion, I'm seeing, I'm feeling, I'm tasting, not meat, it's bread, it's wine. There's everything that you're telling me that gives me true knowledge about reality tells me this is bread and wine. That's a huge problem within Catholicism, that their theology and their metaphysics are butting heads against each other, and they don't even seem to care. Because the Catholic Church said so, and we're supposed to just follow them. By the way, if you can understand what the Catholic Church teaches you, if you have the intellect to be able to understand that, why is it they're not allowed to read the Bible and understand what the Bible says to you? I mean, they trust your ability to understand and interpret their writings, but not your ability to understand and interpret God's writings. I think that's another problem. So I'm not anti-Catholic to the point of like, it's not the horror of Babylon or any, I'm not like that. But I have family members, my wife's parents went back to the Catholic Church after decades of being great born-again evangelicals, and it has just been a real difficult time in the family. And they're dead in their beliefs. They're just sort of getting into mysticism and stuff. And, it's just, yeah, we told them not to do it. But so I care a lot about that, and then the damage it does to people who are trapped in that. My mom, 77, she'll turn 77, August 1st. She's born again for decades. She hasn't been a Catholic since 1964 they get married, I guess. So she's had time to shed the Catholicism. She still struggles with works salvation. Still. Because she's like, you sure it's all grace? Yes. Let's go back and read it in the Bible. Yes, it's absolutely 100% what Jesus did. Nothing what
Why would she want
we
it to
do.
be works?
She doesn't want it to be. She's got this voice that sounds like her priest in the back of her head telling her that it is. And so it's just so ingrained in them.
That's kind of our default position, though.
Yeah, it does
It's
tap into.
self-righteousness. It does tend to.
Yeah, piety. Like I'm so
It
good.
comes down, we're still. I mean, we might think we're saved, and by grace and everything, but we still constantly find a way to hold up our own righteousness to God and say, "Look, God, see, I'm good."
Of course, they have purgatory. No, none of our sins are, or none of our lives are good enough. So that's why you got to work off. It works. You're still work based, and that's what purgatory is for. It's kind of like tie a knot on all the things that you have yet to do right, and you have to pay for it. And their doctrine, or their sacrament of penance, literally means it's not enough to say, "I'm sorry, Laura, thank you for your forgiveness." No, penance is you got to feel like crap, and if you don't, then you're not forgiven. I mean, that's the belief, yeah. Or the Donde es Quia, from Monty Python. I showed our kids that, a couple of those things early on, because it's funny, and also they're like, what are they doing? I said, well, they're making fun of something that is real. And monasticism had this weird, like, if you're not suffering, you're not, earning your salvation. So they weren't getting persecuted by the Romans anymore because it was legal. So, hey, let's just persecute ourselves. Yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, so that's another reason why I'm Baptist now. I've never been Catholic, actually, so I feel freed up. What is the attraction to that? I have no idea why someone would go into that bondage. So, any questions or comments? Or I know it's hot in here. I don't know. I think it's because they were all the wimpy classes they gave up and didn't show up tonight. But we're here. So they just didn't turn on the air probably throughout the day. It should be back next week. Any feedback, comments?
That was a great class.
It had only very little to do with Freud, right?
No, it's-
But he said a lot of weird things that allowed us to talk about some good philosophy and stuff. And I gotta ask again, I don't ever want to bring the vocabulary down so much that I'm not able to say things that are accurate, but I also don't want to, I want to be Richard Howe here. I want to, hit that. Am I explaining myself too often and that's annoying, or am I saying too many things that you're like, yeah, he thinks I know what that means, but is
Well,
it?
when you see me write it down, you know that I don't know what it means, so then I'm gonna look it up, I'm gonna Google it.
Just ask me if I use a word that because sometimes we forget, we're talking and but I've introduced teleology long enough ago and said it often enough. It's a good word to have a handle of and know how to use it in a sentence and what it means.
Well, I love this. I
Yeah,
think
that's
this
a
is
good-
wonderful.
that's a good one.
Yeah,
Great.
last
Great
night I
decision.
thought of it and I asked a coworker today and he goes, yeah, that's good, we'll go with that.
I love it.
That kind of stuff helps me. I'm a visual.
Right.
That's why I went to film school. I think visually you can communicate a lot more with that. So, but yeah, that's what I think the
Yeah, the book,
diagnosis is.
the book gave more details about what Freud actually believed and wrote and stuff like that, but you dealt a lot more with how to kneecap him.
Yeah,
Take
well,
his legs out from under him.
Hopefully
The
in
book
love,
didn't really do a
right?
lot with that.
I don't think any of his chapters have been that strong on the apologetics side. That
Right.
doesn't report to be an
He's just
apologetics book.
revealing, I think he's like
Yeah.
a revealing.
Right. See, be aware of these books, they're
Yeah.
messed up. And he does talk about, here are some dots I'm connecting of this belief to this horrible thing in history. But I don't think he ever goes through and says, here is their belief and here's why that's wrong.
Right.
And so here are some techniques maybe to tease it out. But this is an apologetics class, so we're going to do that. Yeah, so and I thought that he was wrong so early in his thinking, like his premises, so it's like, well, let's just go after that, because then the whole thing, like the kneecaps, like you said. Man, yeah. So, next week is Mead, Margaret Mead.
Margaret Mead.